Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, Grim Judgement, is, well, it's a little bit of a dumb one, and it's a little bit straightforward, but, it is in fact an interesting mystery, and, the idea, and also in this episode, Fred winds up working with his parents to solve the case, which is interesting. But and also a little bit wholesome that they have a bit of a family bonding moment. But yeah, in any case, the episode opens up with Dylan and Brenda, a recurring couple who has been who openly opened the episode, but on a date, and admit that they've been attacked and in and out of the ER a lot, and they even make fun of the whole thing, because the whole thing is that they're making fun of old soap operas, and they're also supposed to be making fun of their characters of the same name. But the whole thing is that they open up on a date and they openly lampshade the fact that they've just been attacked by monsters a lot and haven't really been able to have a proper date. They openly lampshade that at the start of the episode. But in case, as they're finally about to maybe have their first kiss, and Dylan even points this out, they're suddenly attacked by a monster that introduces itself as Hebediah Grim, who announces that he's come there to bear witness and judge them, and declares that their acts of indecency are worthy of being judged for, and then proceeds to start attacking both Dylan and Brenda, and Dylan at this point just decides to cut his losses and run. Which and he even points out it's like, yeah, actually, this is the last time I'm ever getting attacked by monsters. No relationship is worth it, and then he just leaves. But in case with that leaves Brenda completely defenseless to Hebediah Grim, who I should mention is just carrying around a giant mallet and is just swinging and able to easily smash up the car with it. But as he's about to attack Brenda, Gary suddenly comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kick a soccer ball at Hebediah Grim and tells it to leave her alone. And then proceed to chase Hebediah Grim off with a soccer ball and just repeatedly kick him with a soccer ball and proceeds to chase him off. And at which point he scoops up Brenda and proceeds to run away as far as his legs will carry him from Hebediah Grim. And eventually he does wind up telling Brenda that she's lucky he just happened to be in the area with his soccer ball and just happened to be hiking nearby. But of course Hebediah Grim eventually attacks them and they go down a cliff, but eventually manage to escape Hebediah Grim that way. But Hebediah Grim does eventually declare that so long as it is in Crystal Cove, all women deemed impure shall be judged. And that's just a cold open for the episode. But Meanwhile, Fred is actually having a conversation with Daphne at school the next day, and what we quickly find out is that Fred apparently hasn't given up on pursuing Daphne, and openly admits. What we find out is that he's trying to go on a practice date with Daphne, and she's just not having any of it. She openly admits that she's not ready to date him yet, and he's merely admitting, who said anything about date? I said practice date. That's completely different. But in any case, he then sees Gary and Brenda actually kissing, and he thinks that Gary is Dylan for a minute, and does point out that if they practice as much as Dylan and Brenda do, that maybe they could one day be a really good couple. And Daphne just rolls his eyes at him, but then they actually see that it's actually Gary who's the one who's kissing her, and which causes Fred to become very, very confused. And he openly wonders what exactly happened to Dylan, and Brenda immediately points out that Dylan cut and ran when he saw Hebediah Grim, and then Gary stepped in and saved her. And of course Gary points out that it was no big deal, and that he just did what any other person would do, and merely just proceeds to tell the story of how he defeated Hebediah Grim, which is that he essentially kicked a soccer ball at it until it went away. But of course, Fred very confused, and also about the fact that Gary was able to actually not get with a girl, yeah, Fred has established that he kind of sees Gary and Ethan as friends, but there is a line he's willing to draw, and the fact that Gary is able to have a girlfriend just rubs him the wrong way. So he declares that he declares that the gang has a mystery to solve, and they proceed to go home after school, and it's at this point where he gets home and starts running through ideas about what exactly it is that they need to do to solve the mystery, and figure out who this Hebediah Grim character is. But Shaggy and Scooby wind up interrupting and pointing out that they were promised snacks, and they haven't gotten snacks yet. And it's at this point where it's revealed that Fred is actually the one who buys them all the snacks. But he points out that he was in such a hurry that he kind of just straight up admits he forgot to buy them. And then proceeds to ask if they're okay skipping snacks, which causes Scooby to become very offended, pointing out that obviously that he doesn't want to live in a world where they have to skip snacks. At which point, Brad and Judy showed up with a cart full of snacks, and Shaggy and Scooby immediately dig in, and of course, the gang immediately asks Daphne immediately asks where Brad and Judy got all this food, and pointing out that her parents would absolutely love the caterer that they hired, but it's at this point where Brad and Judy reveal that actually they made all the food and snacks themselves, and proceed to go on to explain how essentially they don't have to work. The way they explain it is that because they have patents on all of their traps and other inventions that they've made, and because of their Sternum and Sternum TV parody, they make more than enough royalties to actually be able to successfully be unemployed. They can literally just coast off their own fame and never have to do a 9-to-5 job ever again. And yeah, and it does make sense when you think about it. They are world famous trap inventors, and it does make sense that they wouldn't have to work because of their inventions. It makes perfect sense, and essentially because of that, they have free time to make whatever snack foods they want, and practice a lot of the other things that they normally wouldn't have time for, such as catering. But in any case, they also point out that they overheard Fred's predicament about how he's trying to trap a monster and save Crystal Cove, and Judy then proceeds to point out that they in fact know the exact trap that they need to actually capture the Hebediah Grim, and point out that all they really need is a simple fox trap, but Fred tries to let them down gently about the fact that he doesn't really want their help, but Brad and Judy are actually currently in the process of making this movie, and in order to talk over the very loud sound of the blender, he raises his voice so that they can hear him, and in the process winds up coming off a lot harsher than he meant to, and of course, Brad and Judy's feelings are very hurt about the fact that their son doesn't want their help, and thinking that he's actually mad at them. They then decide to leave before they make it worse, and of course Scooby even the rest of the gang, Scooby especially, point out that his parents were trying to reach out and help him, and he just kind of turned them down very harshly. But and of course Fred points out the very obvious fact that he was just trying to talk over the smoothie, but Scooby tells him not to blame the smoothie. And then proceeds to cuddle one of the smoothie glasses, telling it that it's okay and that he will always love it, and then proceeds to chug it. In any case, at Lover, we then get a cutaway to Lover's Lane later that night, and we do see a whole thing with Janet Nettles and Sheriff Stone. And what we find out is that they are actually apparently started dating. Of course, I mean, it's been implied it was implied in earlier episodes that they actually started a budding relationship. It was starting off with a well, I don't really recognize you as mayor, so I'm not going to acknowledge you as mayor. But but over time they've just gotten to work together, and it turns out they hit it off and had a lot of chemistry with each other, which is kind of neat. But in any case, what we find out is that they're actually on a date, but that Sheriff Stone is actually framed as a stakeout, and he even tries to explain that it's simply a mere stakeout. But what we find out, but of course, as what we find out, Mayor Nettles just does not buy any of it, pointing out that that she clearly has a lot to learn about stakeouts, and then kind of gently grabs Sheriff Stone's tie and tells him that maybe he can show her sometime how proper police work is done, and at which point he decides to return the sentiment, but also completely ruins the mood by calling her by her wrong first name, which just kills the mood entirely. At which point, Mystery Incorporated show up, and Shaggy and Scooby help themselves to some of their picnic baskets, while the rest of the gang kind of question about what exactly it is that Mayor Nettles and Sheriff Stone are actually doing. And once again, Sheriff Stone tries to cover it up by the fact that you're doing a stakeout, but Velma sees through that from a mile away and points out that they're actually in a squad car. And sure enough, one of the other guys there is with his girlfriend, whose name we eventually find out is Gwendolyn. But another guy is there named with his girlfriend Gwendolyn, and he openly yells at Sheriff Stone, telling them to keep it down and that they can't get into any indecent acts while they're being watched like a hawk. And honestly, that's just a really funny line. That the fact that they're aware that is a thing that people go to these kinds of places for. It's just that's the joke. But in any case, as they're actually talking and actually trying to look into what exactly is going on, Hebediah Grim again shows up and then proceeds to declare that. That Daphne, Mayor Nettles, and Gwendolyn are all impure, and that they must be judged. And the reason he cites is for their indecent clothing. And of course declares that they're all going to be judged. But then Velma actually winds up pointing out that she's very confused as to why she's not on the list of judged girls. But Hebediah Grim merely remarks that she's chaste and pure and pure and decent, so he's not going to come after her, which causes Velma to become openly offended, and she's very angry about the fact that Hebediah Grim doesn't want to judge her. But in case he then proceeds to charge in and tries to attack everybody, but once again Gary and Ethan appear again, and Gary appears again and proceeds to attack Hebediah Grim once again with his soccer ball and tries to chase it off and tells it to leave them alone, and he eventually grabs Gwendolyn and gets her and pulls her to safety. But in the process, it enables the gang to actually get Mayor Nettles to safety inside the mystery machine, and the rest of the gang as well get inside and proceed to flee the scene. And of course Fred asks if they've actually shaken him, but then they find out that no, they have not, and they're actually being attacked by Hebediah Grim. And it eventually causes them to actually go off the road and start cleaning off the cliff. And they eventually find out that Gary is actually sitting in the back and with Gwendolyn. And of course they wonder how exactly Gary actually got there. But Gary merely remarks that he was already there. And then proceeds to sell the exact same story he told when he actually went to go rescue Brenda earlier. About how he happened to be jogging by with his lucky soccer ball again, and then saw Gwendolyn was in trouble and decided to save her, which of course Velma points out is suspicious, pointing out that it's odd that Gary managed to get romantically involved with a girl twice. And sure enough, Gwendolyn thinks Gary is single, but of course, Fred eventually interrupts him, pointing out that he's still very much careening out of control, and eventually he goes off the cliff, lands on top of a house, and then lands on top of a bouncy house in the front yard, and that winds up saving them. And of course they're very confused and of course Fred is very happy about the fact that he managed to save it, and afterwards they go back to Lover's Cliff, which where it is for Sheriff Stone. Actually, he did wind up getting attacked by Hebediah Grim during the attack, and he's currently stuck in his car and unable to get out. So he's telling his deputies to bring the jaws of life and get him out. And it also criticizes them, pointing out that they obviously don't seem to know what they're doing. And of course, they then proceed. And of course, as they're looking around, they start looking around for clues and evidence. And Velma eventually notices that Hebediah Grim's footprints are very strange indentations on the bottom of them, which of course Fred points out is a very good clue, but and points out that they're now one step closer to solving the mystery. But but then Velma points out that she also suspects Gary to be at least in some way affiliated with Hebediah Grim, pointing out that it was strange about the fact that he was there, that he was just coincidentally happened to be there twice, and of course they point out that since Hebediah Grim was already since Hebediah Grim and Gary couldn't actually be in the same place, they then cite that maybe Ethan is the culprit instead. And decide to stake out Ethan because they point out that obviously since he and Gary are best friends, they would obviously be in cahoots with each other and be able to pull this kind of tag team off. And of course they do decide to actually follow Ethan around using various disguises and hidden cameras. And of course they just kind of follow him through his routine where he's just going to soccer practice, going to his classes, and he just kind of leaves. But what I do want to call attention to is the actual disguises themselves, because they start off as just basic, we're going to just hide it with a camera and take pictures of them, but eventually they start actively disguising themselves and they get even increasingly ridiculous, to the point where by the time it goes through the montage to Fred, he has special goggles, he has one of those, he has Groucho Marx glasses with a hidden camera built into them, and at that point, it's just openly absurd. But eventually, by the time they actually they eventually have reached the point where they're actually at Ethan's house, watching him that way. They've dressed in full ghillie suits and are currently watching him from the bushes with binoculars. And of course, Daphne points out that this seems preposterous since they've been following him all day. And point out that he obviously doesn't seem like he's hiding anything nefarious. But then Velma points out that since he's at his house, he may let his guard down. And Fred cites that they'll just have to keep an eye on them. And of course they do look out on Ethan's yard. And what we found is that Ethan just has a bunch of junk lying around his yard. For reasons that are not made clear, but it's implied that he's a bit poor and that he just has a bunch of stuff lying around. His house is a bit in shambles, and he has a dilapidated trailer in his backyard and a whole bunch of other things that his family never got rid of. But then Ethan comes out apparently dressed to the nines in full sports gear and wielding two baseball bats. And what we find out is that apparently Ethan just has a almost ritualistic routine of climbing around all of the junk in his backyard and kind of doing a bit of a drum solo with it using the baseball bats. And of course Velma then proceeds to cite that that's not normal, and it isn't. He very much, who just has a huge ass jam session and on all the junk of their backyard wearing full sports gear. That is just weird. But of course Fred points out that's fine and that he'll eventually run out of steam. But then several hours go by. It's now nightfall, and Gary and Ethan is still very much jamming out, and Fred cites that maybe Ethan has more energy than he thought. And of course, what we find is that all the other members of Mystery Incorporated have since gone on to do something else while they're waiting. Shaggy and Scooby obviously have gotten food. Velma is currently on her computer. I'll get to that in a minute. And Daphne is currently on her phone. And eventually, Daphne decides to just break up the whole monotony of it and decides that hey, Ethan is clearly busy. Why don't they just go up to his room and investigate? And of course, everybody has a collective, all right, we should have thought of that earlier, and immediately goes upstairs to go and investigate. And they do find a significant amount of evidence on Ethan's desk, as well as several of his sports trophies and a couple of other things. But they do find a couple of things, such as a rejected drama club application, and also a pamphlet for the for the scorning, which is a play that the drama club was actually put on, and citing that they do seem to have evidence. Fred announces that maybe they seem like they have their culprit now, but then Ethan actually walks in and wonders what exactly it is they're doing in his room, and they merely point out that they actually have evidence that seems to suggest that he is in fact Hebediah Grim, but even jokingly denies it and points out that there's no way he's Hebediah Grim, and at which point Daphne points out that if he's not Hebediah Grim, then Gary has to be, but of course, Ethan points out that since Gary was attacked, there's really no real evidence of that, and also to just kind of rub it in their face, he then proceeds to call Gary on his laptop via a web call, and tells Gary that it's very clear that they think that the Mystery Incorporated thinks that he's Hebediah Grim, and of course Gary on the other end denies it, but then also points out that there's no way he could have been Hebediah Grim, but then it's at this point where Velma points out that if he's not Hebediah Grim, then how he's in all the places at once, at which point Gary merely deflects that he'll answer all their questions, but then also points out that Hebediah Grim has appeared in Ethan's room and is about to attack them, and tells them to look out. And of course, right on cue, Hebediah Grim immediately appears in Ethan's house and immediately starts attacking the group, telling them that they'll all be judged, especially Daphne. And of course, once again, Velma brings up the fact that Hebediah Grim doesn't want to judge her, and he merely tells her that she's free to go. But she points out that she's not going anywhere, and he declares so be it, and proceeds to get ready to attack the gang. But Ethan, already dressed tonight in his sports gear and wielding baseball bats, just jumps in and attacks Hebediah Grim, and the two battle for a bit. And eventually, Hebediah Grim does in fact punch a hole in the wall and winds up going out of it, and eventually Ethan does wind up kicking Hebediah Grim out of the hole in his room, and Hebediah Grim mysteriously disappears. But it's at this point where having seen all of this, Daphne is immediately head over heels for Ethan, and does point out that what he did was very brave, and Ethan does point out that he was happy to have been of service, and then volunteers to actually walk Daphne home, much to Fred's chagrin, and proceeds to point out that he actually does have a lead they can follow up, pointing out that Dougal McGinnis was actually the lead in the scorning, and that they should probably go and investigate him. And we're left with no other lead, although Fred isn't particularly happy about the fact that they've walked him home. But according to Velma, Daphne can wait. They do decide to go to Dougal McGinnis's house, which, as we find out, definitely looks the part of a guy who would absolutely be guilty of something. As we find out, the house is just dilapidated and completely falling apart, and overall, it's just a mess. But of course Velma does point out that the house is definitely guilty of something, even if Dougal isn't. But of course, perturbed by the sight of the house, Shaggy says that they should probably go home. But Fred merely pushes them back up the stairs, telling them that they've got no time for that, and that they need to figure out what exactly it is that's going on with Hebediah Grim. And of course, Fred does accidentally shoves Shaggy in the process, but Shaggy winds up tripping over a yearbook, and when they open it up, discovers that every single girl that has been attacked is circled on it with little descriptors of how hot they are, and that Daphne's circle merely reads Queen Hotness, and of course this causes Fred to become very concerned and realize that this is the smoking gun they need to and then decides to actually charge in and goes to knock on Dougal McGinnis's front door, and then the door opens and we see a bright, blinding light that is eventually revealed to be Dougal McGinnis's stage mirror, and he tells them to make them quick, pointing out that he's actually putting on a play at the Crystal Cove Insane Asylum for animals, and that will never not be an absurd thing that this series has brought in. Just the fact that there's an entire insane asylum for animals will never not be funny to me, but In case they then proceed to go and confront Dougal McGinnis, with Fred pointing out that the scorning play has actually caused Dougal to actually become warped and twisted and think that and decide to start using the Hebediah Grim thing to actually attack girls, and points out that they did find evidence of it, but Dougal then proceeds to point out that actually he hated putting on the scorning because he just didn't like the premise of it. He didn't like the premise of an old-timey judge, and he just openly admits he did not like the premise at all. And of course, Fred also points out that they have evidence of all the circles of all the girls that have been attacked, but Dougal points out that isn't actually his yearbook, and points out that his yearbook actually has sequins and sparkles and everything else on it that he's put on himself, but then also notes that actually he does know who owned the yearbook and that he actually signed it. But before he can actually tell the gang who exactly it is that the yearbook belongs to, Hebediah Grim suddenly appears in his house, punches a hole through the stairwell, and knocks Dougal out. And then tells them that the actor has been dealt with, that the actor has been judged, and that Daphne Bake is next, and then proceeds to retreat through the hole that he made. And then the gang goes to check on Dougal, and it's clear that he's going to be in the hospital for a while. He got knocked into a wall from the other side of the house. He's not getting up from that. But in case realizing that there may in fact be a lead regarding the drama team, Velma does in fact reveal that she actually went to go text the drama department, and they texted her back revealing that they did in fact investigate their costume stash, and that the two costumes that Dougal used for the scorning are actually missing. Both the main costume he used on stage and the backup costume in case the main costume had a hole or a tear in it, which is just standard practice for when you're doing a play production, honestly. That is the kind of thing that you would do. The fact that just when you're putting on a stage play, the last thing you want is for your outfit to be ripped or torn and and have a wardrobe malfunction on stage. So of course there's going to be a backup. It makes perfect sense. So yeah, it makes sense that there are two costumes, but in case Fred merely points out that obviously the only real lead that they have right now is that Hebediah Grim seems to think that Daphne is their next target, and Daphne merely insists that she can stay close to Ethan and he will protect her, but of course Fred openly points out that he's not going to let that happen by any means, but then realizes that he came off a bit too harshly and a bit too intensely, and then bows his head for it. At which point Shaggy and Scooby point out that they don't really need to worry about it because they have everything they need, citing that they actually have the Brian and Judy's catering to actually tie them over, and that all they really need to do is just wait out Hebediah Grim until he leaves. And of course, they then proceed to help themselves to the meat carving station that Brian and Judy are currently running. But it's at this point where Velma points out that something about the whole mystery is actually bothering her. At which point, Shaggy and Scooby then proceed to tease her by pointing out that maybe it's because she wasn't deemed judge-worthy by Hebediah Grim, and she just kind of rolls her eyes at them and gets up to leave, and to just get away from them. But in case it's at this point where Brad and Judy point out that it's clear that Fred is going to need their help, and it points out that they know the exact trap that they need to actually set to actually trap Hebediah Grim, and that if he wants their help, they can, and that he'd be more than happy to both help save Crystal Cove and Fred's quote unquote girlfriend. So, and Fred openly jumps at the opportunity to keep Daphne safe, so he decides to actually take his parents up on their offer. And of course they immediately go to the trapping site where we find out that Brad and Judy are in fact pros at this. They do in fact know how to make a very successful trap. And Fred can only watch slack-jawed in awe as they're putting the trap up, and points out that he could never actually aspire to be that good a trap maker, but then they reassure him that one day he will in fact get there because he is the son of two very successful trap makers, and that trapping is in his blood, and that with proper work, work and with proper hard work and dedication, he will eventually become a trap maker that may in fact surpass them one day. And this causes Fred to actually start tearing up, because that is the nicest thing his parents have ever said to him. And it's just it is in fact a really cute moment where Brad and Judy do in fact reassure their son that yes, you can be a successful trap maker if you want to, son. Just keep at it. But and then this is a stark contrast to Mayor Jones, who not only wasn't particularly happy with Fred's newfound love of traps, and we do eventually find out that is in fact a clue to whose true parents are, but yeah, the fact that Mayor Jones never really coddled that behavior in Fred, it's just a clear sign that that was something he was missing from his life, and Fred is very happy about that. But in any case, Daphne is currently, the rest of the gang is actually currently sitting in the mystery machine. Velma's actually sitting in the back of the mystery machine, and Scooby is slowly trying to settle up next to her, and eventually she does ask Scooby why he's getting so close to her, and Scooby merely points out that she's most likely the safest place to be right now, and while Velma can't exactly deny that logic, she does eventually get upset and goes out the back of the mystery machine. At which point Fred shows up to see Daphne, and then gives her a helmet and a harness, and tells her once she gets all of her gear on that they'll be ready for a practice run. But it's at this point where Daphne snaps at him, pointing out that for the last time she's not going to go on a practice date with him. But of course, Fred points out that he knows that, but he also points out that the main reason he's doing this is because he doesn't want Hebediah Grim actually attacking her anymore. He wants to keep Daphne safe, and then he points out that no creep who just judges girls is going to get away with anything like that. And this in fact causes Daphne to realize that she may still in fact have feelings for Fred, because she quickly realizes that Fred, well, yeah, he did, and understandably, he did dump her to go find his birth parents, and honestly, that's understandable, but also kind of a dick move on his part. But she does point out that she realizes that Fred is probably the only guy who will ever actually make her feel safe, and points out that maybe one day she will be happy to go on a practice date with him. At which point Fred cheers but then plays it off as if he's cool. At which point he decides to leave to go and actually and the camera changes to actually show the back of them, but he then leaves to say that he's going to go check the proximity sensors and then leaves. At which point Hebediah Grim comes from the other side and gets ready to attack Daphne, telling her that she's about to be judged. But then it's at this point where it's revealed that Scooby had actually swapped places with Daphne at some point, and tells the Hebediah Grim not to judge him because he's beautiful. At which point a harness then proceeds to pull Scooby out of the vehicle, and but in case Scooby then proceeds to grab a harness and is then proceed to be pulled out of the mystery machine by a harness, and Hebediah Grim is then launched into the trap. Reveal that the mystery machine itself has actually been turned into a giant springboard, and he's then knocked into a series of punching glove type contraptions before being locked into stockades. And this causes Hebediah Grim to go down, and of course Fred is very happy about the fact that they've caught Hebediah Grim, that he's not going to be judging anybody anymore. But then a second Hebediah Grim shows up and declares that he may not be able to, but that he's more than happy to take up the mantle of his partner, and then proceeds to get ready to attack the Mystery Incorporated. But then Fred tells them that they actually want to introduce him to a few new friends, and of course right on cue, he's actually launched into yet another trap when Daphne is actually pulled away by yet another harness, and he winds up getting locked in the same exact trap that the first Hebediah Grim was locked into, and then gloating about the fact that they've caught both Hebediah Grims. They then reveal who the actual culprits behind the Hebediah Grim attacks are, and surprising no one, it is in fact Gary and Ethan. And of course Gary and Ethan are flabbergasted by the fact that they've actually been caught, pointing out that they were so sneaky and that nobody would have been able to see through their disguise. But then we find out that actually they weren't that sneaky at all. And sure enough, it quickly becomes apparent that they were just they are just not good at the whole criminal thing. What we find out is that all of the evidence that leads directly to them, and they were not very good with it. First and foremost, it's revealed that the weird indentations Velma found are actually cleat marks. So they quickly find out that the person who was dressing up as Hebediah Grim had to have been an athlete of some kind, and but also points out that two costumes went missing, which means there are likely two Hebediah Grims. And also the fact that they not only was the victim was any of the victims one of them, and alternated between the two of them, but the smoking gun was the fact that they planted a yearbook on the patio of Dougal McGinnis's house, and what we find out is that apparently it had Ethan's name in it. And Ethan was dumb enough to leave his yearbook that had his name in it on the front porch, where it could be used as incriminating evidence against him. So yeah, these two are idiots. So yeah, of course Velma blows to the fact that she's actually been able to successfully capture them, and insists to know who wants to judge her now, and Scooby really points out that she's being a little bit scary and having shown up in his harness. At which point Daphne, who also wheels in on a harness, then proceeds to ask why they actually did it, and as we find out, they did it to pick up chicks. It's pure and simple. That's literally the only reason they did it. And of course, this is something they apparently believe. They believe that not only were dragons originally real, which they were not ever. They were made up for a thing, because we didn't fully understand at the time how dinosaurs worked. So we assumed we uncovered dinosaurs for the first time, thought they were some sort of prehistoric dragon type thing, or we heard the legends. So either way, they're based on dragons are supposed to be based on dinosaurs and pre-dinosaurs, and we had no idea what exactly was going on with that. So we just made up dragons as an explanation. But they claim that knights in shining armor were coming to defend the damsel in distress from dragons all the time, and that's essentially what they were going with. And basically they just used pure suspension bridge effect to actually get girls to fall in love with them, which honestly is just a little bit fun. It's just kind of works a little bit too well. But of course Fred points out that actually does make a bit of sense. But of course it's at this point where Sheriff Stone and Mayor Nettles actually show up, and Mayor Nettles is actually wearing Sheriff Stone's hat, and it's implied that they were on a date and doing something, but of course they then proceed to point out Fred is completely oblivious to the fact that they were on yet another quote-unquote date. So he merely points out that was actually impeccable timing, and he's surprised they got there that quickly. At which point they wonder if they was actually on another stakeout, and they do play it off as the fact that they were on a stakeout, and also that Mayor Nettles is currently wearing Sheriff Stone's hat because it's a disguise, which is not how that works. But yeah, it's implied that they were making out, possibly more than that, considering this is a made-for-TV kids show, so they obviously can't show anything. But it's implied that they were doing more than just going on a date. It's implied, but they're not allowed to tell us that. They're not allowed to show us that for a made-for-TV kids show. They're not allowed to do that. But in case with the Hebediah Grim case unmasked, Fred then proceeds to thank Brad and Judy for actually helping him with the mystery, pointing out that he couldn't have solved it without them. But then they revealed that actually he could have solved it without them, and then revealing that the trap they made is nothing special, that he could have done that on his own without their help. They just pointed out that they wanted to do it as a family bonding exercise, and do it as a family. And Fred is very much tears up over this and pulls Brad and Judy into a hug. And then it's revealed that Cassidy Williams, or Angel Diana, whatever her name is, it's revealed that Cassidy is actually watching the whole thing with a pair of binoculars, and that's where the episode ends. But and yeah, it makes perfect sense. The recap and also previous episodes just established that Cassidy does not trust Brad and Judy at all, so it makes sense she would be keeping a vigilant watch over them to make sure they're actually being there for their son. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. It is established that Cassidy does not trust Brad and Judy, and also based on Professor Pericles' comments from the previous episode, or rather whatever episode came before that came up. But it's implied that the rest of Mystery Incorporated doesn't trust them either. They are just enigmas, and nobody is fully understands their true motives. But yeah, it's clear that they love their son and wanted to work with him on something. So yeah, it's clear that that's just a really wholesome thing. But yeah, I just want to mention this. Gary and Ethan are idiots, and their whole plan was to just pick up chicks. And that is probably one of the most elaborate things I've ever seen in order to just pick up women. That is probably the most elaborate thing. They didn't need to do any of this. They didn't need to do any sort of illegal and almost attack people with giant mallets to actually draw each other. And but they did. They decided the best way to do this was to dress up in a pilgrimage outfit that they stole from the local playwright thing, and just go with that. So yeah. So yeah, that's essentially what happened. Hebediah Grim was just an elaborate ruse to pick up chicks. That's literally it. But in any case, yeah, that's gonna do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my Twitter to keep up to date with what's going on with the channel. If you guys absolutely want to see updates with that, just go check that out. Also go check out my Patreon. I want to post more frequently on there, but nobody really follows me on there. So just go check out my Patreon. Just make sure that you guys are actually seeing everything. But yeah, go check that out. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then just be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then yeah, just go check those out. I have no idea where it's going to send you, so just let me know. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!